On August 3, 2012, 15-year-old Emily Reimer went to a friend's house for a sleepover. In the morning, she was gone. The front door was locked from the inside. It started off as any other day for Patty and Mike Reimer. They got up early, had breakfast. These devices are voice-activated speakers that record audio, and use it to provide information or perform a function. The only way to turn on an Amazon Echo is by saying Alexa. So how could someone have been using it if nobody was home? There was also the fact that the previous day, Patty had used the device to order toilet paper and paper towels, but neither had arrived yet. Patty froze. Whose voice was that? Then silence again. Mike and Patty poured themselves a glass of wine and sat down at the kitchen table to wait for their son to come home. About 15 minutes later, they heard more voices coming from the echo. Now there were 3 of them. All 3 were girls about 15 years old. It might be crazy, but this was too much of a coincidence. But how could they possibly trace the location of a conversation that sounded like it was coming from a toy? Who would believe that a smart speaker was talking to ghosts? But the parents offered to pay, and suddenly the company was much more interested. 2 days later, they received an email from the company. The coordinates traced from the conversation had led to a cabin in Wisconsin. The cabin was small, barely big enough to fit the 3 girls. It had been abandoned for over 40 years. Police found remains that matched Emily's DNA in a shallow grave. They also found a secret room in the basement of the cabin that contained several boxes filled with personal items belonging to Emily and another girl who had gone missing 5 years earlier. The owners had boarded up the windows and put up signs warning people not to enter. He was charged with 2 counts of murder and 1 count of kidnapping. They know where their daughter is, and they know who is responsible for her death. In an interview with police, Keith admitted that he had kidnapped both girls. He described how he lured them to his cabin with promises of food and drink, but things quickly took a dark turn. He confessed to killing them and burying their bodies in the shallow grave. During his trial, Keith tried to plead not guilty, claimed that he had unkilled either girl and that they had died in an accident and he'd buried them, but the jury saw through his lies. If true, this would explain why the device was constantly turned on and why it recorded everything perfectly. Then Mike remembered an article he'd seen about new technology that could make virtual replicas of objects. They reached out to the company and explained their situation. They sent over a sample of the recording. How did it start talking? Was it really Emily trying to tell her parents where her body was hidden? We may never know for sure, but there are a few theories. It could have been an extremely rare malfunction of the device. The sound was probably picked up by its microphone and stored in the cloud, and then it was played back by accident. The girls talked about heading to a cabin in the woods and meeting up with a guy named Keith. Patty had a feeling that this was their chance to find out what happened to their daughter. Inside, they found traces of human blood on the floor and walls, as well as strange markings that seemed to have been carved into the wood with a sharp object. But no bodies were found. She didn't know how, but whatever was happening here was important. They were giggling and whispering about being tired and hungry. Patty found their son's room empty. His bed wasn't made, and his clothes were strewn across the floor. He was never good with change, and had been staying with a friend since their daughter's disappearance. 150 feet away from the cabin, hidden under a pile of leaves, was a pair of jeans that had been ripped apart with a dull object. DNA testing later showed that the jeans belonged to Emily, Patty called him, and he confirmed that he was at his friend S' house and had been there all day. People were split on whether or not to believe in the story. Skeptics claimed that the whole thing was made up for attention and profit. Some people even went as far as saying that Patty must have killed her own daughter, the girl continued. 31952, she said slowly, reciting the numbers as if reading them off of something. Patty and Mike stared at each other in disbelief. Was this some kind of sick joke? Had one of their kids somehow gotten into the house and left the echo playing a recording? But then they realized that none of their kids would ever know their home address. It wasn't written down anywhere. They memorized it whenever they had to say it out loud. As she looked around the kitchen, after 3 years, could this be the break in the case that they'd been waiting for? With shaking hands, Patty asked the obvious question. Who's there? Silence. Is anyone there? Still nothing? Patty decided to check the other rooms while Mike stayed behind to keep listening. She noticed the box containing the toilet paper was sitting right there in the pantry. It was as if the delivery had come overnight. You can ask them questions like, "What's the weather today?" or play music from your favorite artist. but you have to be very specific. Say, Alexa, play the song Hotel California by Eagles. Or Alexa, what's the weather in Chicago? Voices that sounded like they were coming from a kid's toy, not a smart home device. Patty told her husband, "This has to be connected to our daughter's case." "I just have a feeling," Mike agreed. He was a cop for most of his life and learned to trust his gut. "I agree, but we need proof. If you just say play Hotel California, nothing will happen." Read the news on their tablets and took their 2 dogs for a walk. Mike was a retired state trooper, and Patty worked in real estate. Patty knew that the echo was extremely sensitive and would often turn on when she was not even talking to it. But then later that same day, she was watching TV in the living room and heard the familiar sound of the echo turning itself on. This time it wasn't just background noise or static. A voice was coming from the speaker. At 55, they were empty nesters whose kids had moved away to college. All the windows were closed, and there were no signs of a struggle or a break-in. The other girls in the house were still sleeping. So how did Emily get out? No one knows. For 3 long years, there were no solid leads in the case. Then, in early 2015, everything changed. When they returned home from their walk, Patty noticed that her Amazon Echo smart speaker was turned on and listening. She told her husband, "I could have sworn that thing was turned off." The couple tried to dismiss these events as simple coincidences. It was small and shaky, like it was coming from a child. Suddenly, the hair on Patty's arm stood up, and she felt a chill run down her spine. Could it be? He heard the sound of footsteps, slow and dragging like the person making them was exhausted. "Help me," a voice whispered, relieved but frustrated that their hopes had been raised. Mike and Patty didn't know what to do. Should they call the police? But they had nothing to go on, and the girls started talking about where they were going to meet up. Patty and Mike listened intently. And after 3 years without any leads, they couldn't afford to waste this opportunity. At first, the company was reluctant to help, but now it was too late. The local police had gotten involved and were investigating. A few weeks later, while searching the surrounding area, a detective found something. By now, the case had become a national sensation. Every major news channel was covering it. Then more evidence came to light. Police arrested the owner of the cabin, 58-year-old Keith Jesperson. He was convicted of all 3 charges and sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences without parole. But what about the Echo? Another theory is that whoever was responsible for building the Amazon Echo intentionally put a backdoor in the device so that they could listen to customers' conversations. Whatever the truth may be, Patty and Mike Reimers finally have answers. Do you think this is a miracle, a coincidence, or something else? Let me know your thoughts. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.